Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the extra mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now, your host, Jackson Mummy, owner of the Celebration Bar Review.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 302 of the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. This is your host, Jackson Mummy. I'm glad to be with you. It's been a very busy week in the bar exam world. I hope that it's been a good week for you. I hope everyone is doing well and that you're staying healthy and safe. And we are so glad that you're with us today. If this is your first time with us on the podcast, we want to welcome you. We do these episodes every week. Right now, we're releasing on the weekends because there's so much information coming at us by the end of the week with all of the changes in the bar exam that we want to make sure that this is timely for you. And we provide these episodes in both video and audio format. If you'd like to watch today's episode, go to celebrationbarreview.com/302. That's the episode number. If you'd like to listen to your podcast, you can subscribe to The Extra Mile on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, radio.com, Spotify, lots of places where podcasts are syndicated. Make sure that you register and subscribe so that you don't miss out on any episodes. Well, we have a really full episode for you today. We're going to begin with an interview that I did with Megan Saya. If you've been listening to our podcast in the last month or so, you know that Megan has been getting together with me every week to talk about the changes in the bar exam, what's happening, where we see things going, what changes are being made by the different states and their jurisdictions. And she and I got together for a fairly wide-ranging conversation about all of those changes as we know them up to the minute. We also talked a little bit about the bar exam results in Texas and a couple of other states. We'll share that information with you as well. So we've got all of that coming up for you in just a moment. Now, before we jump into the rest of the podcast, I just want to let you know that we have a very special webinar coming up. It's called Now is the Best Time to Take the Bar Exam, Why You Should Ignore the Crowd and the Fear. In this special free training program, we're going to show you why we think you should be registering for the next administration of the bar exam, whether that's July, September, something else, because there frankly is a very particular, specific strategy that we think can assist you, particularly if you're a bar repeater, in order to pass the exam. Now, this training is really valuable. It lasts less than an hour. And we wrap up the hour with a live question and answer period in which I'll take your questions about particular jurisdictions and information and any questions you've got really about the strategy that we're offering to you. To register for this webinar, you just need to go to the show notes. You will see a link there to register. We've been doing the training on Saturdays at 5 p.m. Eastern and Tuesday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern. And you can register for either time that works best for you. And even if you can't attend the live training, make sure that you register. You'll get a copy of the recording and you can watch it at your convenience. Now, again, it's all free. It's incredibly valuable. We've had a lot of people go through this training in the last month or so, and we've gotten great results and great feedback from people. If you'd like more information about the training, you can go to celebrationbarreview.com/now. And you'll find out all about it there. But you can register very simply just by clicking the link or the button here on the show notes. All right, well, I don't want to keep you waiting any longer. Let's go ahead and jump into the conversation that Megan and I just had about all the things that have gone on in bar review world in the last 7 days. I'm joined again today by Celebration Bar Review's senior editor and mentor, Megan Saya. Hi, Megan, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you, Jackson?
Well, good. It's been a busy week in bar review, hasn't it?
Yes, it has.
And I'm pretty sure next week's going to be even busier. So we've got a lot to talk about today. I want to begin by looking at some bar exam results that came out last week. And we'll transition then to talk a little bit about the changes in exam dates. The first thing that we want to talk about were the results that came out, at least in 3 states, that I thought were trend setters for us. The first of these was the Texas bar exam. They released their February 2020 results, and the news was not good. The overall pass rate was only 46%. The pass rate for repeat bar takers was 37%. Those are very low numbers, much lower than even a year ago. The pass rate last February was 53%. What do you make of those numbers?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. We're just seeing these downward trends and more states starting to look like California, like bar passage rates, which is rough, especially given all the uncertainty in the legal job market right now too. And, people just not even sure when they're going to be able to take the bar next. Yeah, it's just these are really tough numbers to be looking at right now.
Yeah, and certainly the repeat bar taker pass rate, 37%, is pretty discouraging to a lot of people. Now, we're going to talk about what Texas is doing coming up in July and the fall. They've got kind of an unusual offering, and this will be the last time Texas stays in the 3-day or 2.5-day exam. So
Yes.
we'll talk about that more in a minute, but that was one of the big results. It was also consistent with a couple of other states that we got results in during the week. Maryland had an overall pass rate of an overall pass rate of 39%. I wish 93. It was 39% pass rate overall in Maryland. And Connecticut had a 34% pass rate. And these are overall rates. They're not repeat bar taker rates. So these are, again, a trend towards these very low pass rates that we've seen across the country, almost everywhere. New York was a little bit of an exception, went up just a slight amount, but almost every jurisdiction has gone down. What does that tell us going into the California and Georgia results still ahead?
Oh, I mean, I think the California students are well versed in, how tough that exam is, and we don't expect anything different there. Certainly for repeat bar takers, the numbers are often very low. And then Georgia, I guess, we might not be shocked if we do see this same trend of these lower numbers, even in states where that hasn't traditionally been their results.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think this is going to be a tough couple of weeks coming up. Now, we expect California results on Friday, May 8th. They'll be released at 6 p.m. Pacific time. Georgia only says mid-May. We don't know exactly what that means. It could be the first week in May. It could be later than that. My spidey sense tells me that Georgia will try to beat California out with their results, in part because the editorial attention, I think, goes to California. And I don't think Georgia's really looking forward to being in the spotlight here. They've had their share of problems over the last couple of years. Also, it just doesn't make any sense if Georgia would take longer to grade a handful of exams relative to California's thousands and thousands. So we'll see. Next week, we may have those results by the time we come back to you in the podcast. But certainly, I think this overall trend, we're now down to just the last few states releasing results. There are a few small UBE jurisdictions still to come. But the overall trend has continued to be, I think, downward. The multi-state bar exam score did drop overall nationally. So there's a lot of reasons to be concerned. And then you add on top of that coronavirus and the upcoming July exams and the cloudy, the crystal ball gets cloudy, doesn't it? It's hard to figure out where we're going with all this. So I know that a lot of people want to keep up to date on what's going on with the July 2020 exams. You and I are going to walk through some of the key states now and some of the announcements that they've made recently. I also want to let our listeners know that you can go to celebrationbarreview.com. In the menu items, there is a link to the July 2020 updates. It will take you through state by state with links to the specific state orders where they exist. And we keep that up to date, so it's a good resource for you. But as we look forward into July and beyond, you want to kick us off with some states and some things that are going on?
Yeah, so one of the big news items from this past week was that California still has not made quite an official decision, but at least they've gotten halfway there. So the California Supreme Court did say that they will be not giving the July exam. Instead, they're going to move it to September 9th and 10th. Sort of what's up in the air still is that the court decided to go along with the recommendations of the task force and suggest that the exam be given online in September. And where that's really interesting is that the NCBE gives the multiple choice portion of the California state test, obviously, and the NCBE has not indicated any willingness or desire to give that portion of the exam online. And so there are still a lot of questions the court's order refers to, working with the NCBE, but or a desire to work with the NCBE to get them to allow California to give the MBE online, but we're just not seeing necessarily any proof that that is actually going to happen by the time we get to September 9th and 10th.
Yeah, this online testing thing is really problematic on a lot of levels. Now, Massachusetts has also said they might do online testing, but they've also talked about just skipping the multi-state entirely and leaving the uniform bar exam, which is what they've been giving, and just going back to the old Massachusetts bar exam, which would be very strange, I think. California hasn't gone quite that far. They're still at least making noises about wanting to work with the national conference. But the reality of online testing is still a long way away. There was an interesting article this week that talked about online testing by Josh Blackman and Derek Muller, and two law professors, and they both talked about how difficult it is to actually proctor these online exams. And we don't want to be too far down the road when it comes to speculating. We don't know what this is going to be. We don't know if it'll even happen this way. But there's a lot of information and I think a lot of concern about whether or not these online proctor programs, I mean, they're basically webcams, how effective are they? Do they work? Can you beat them? They're not even necessarily working in lower stakes law school exams. What do you do when you get to a high stakes bar exam? I mean, you're not even allowed to bring, materials into the room. What do you do when you've got a home study test here? I don't know. I'm skeptical about it. I think the bar examiners, the NCBE is skeptical about it as well. Now, one of the strange parts, and I know you've been following this part of the story, is that California has a testing ground that nobody else has. You want to talk about that?
Right. So one way that California has been able to even suggest doing an online exam in September is because they are pretty unique. They give a first-year law students exam, which is also called the baby bar, twice a year. And that is for students from specific schools because California allows non-ABA accredited law schools. So students from specific schools have to take and pass this baby bar before they can continue on and be eligible to graduate from law school in California and then take the actual bar exam. So the baby bar is scheduled to be given in June, and the examiners are saying, and the court's saying that they will continue on with that administration. Now, obviously, it is a significantly smaller number of students than the California bar. So they were already hoping to do that as an online test or had been working towards that. So they've made the decision to go ahead and give the baby bar in June as an online exam. And they explicitly refer to that as a trial run for the actual bar exam then on September 9th and 10th. Yeah. So that's one way that California just really differs from other states who don't have the ability to figure this out beforehand, and certainly understandably, and I think correctly, don't feel comfortable making the actual bar exam a sort of guinea pig administration. So unfortunately for first-year law students examinees, they are the guinea pigs with this now, that they're going to be sort of trial by fire and see what happens with them and whether or not it crashes and burns or works really smoothly. And from there, we'll have a much better idea of whether or not a September online administration will be feasible in California.
Yeah, so just to be clear, the June 2020 baby bar will be done online. Yes. The October 2020 baby bar has been canceled at this point.
Correct.
And of course, with the baby bar, most of the country isn't familiar with it, but it does not require the national conference to participate. This is something that the examiners in California draft up. As we've been talking to the national conference and following what they've been doing, their long-term goal was to look at the efficacy of doing an online exam, but they were years away from doing that. And I think that it will be very difficult for them to put that together in the short period of time that would exist. I mean, that's my sense of the situation. The other real problem when you take away the multi-state, as Massachusetts might very well do, and California may have to do, is that you reduce the reliability of the scores. And in testing, they use this reliability index, and it's really interesting. When you add a multiple choice exam like the MBE, you get to a reliability of something like 0.90 on a 100 scale, so 90% reliability. When you remove the multiple choice and go to essays only or essays and performance tests, your reliability goes down to 60%. That is really a dangerous number, because if you've only got a 60% confidence that the people who've passed the exam deserve to, or the people who failed deserve to fail, then you're really, I think, beginning to get at the core of the integrity of the exam. And I think it puts the bar takers and the bar examiners in a really tough spot here as to what to do. Now, admittedly, you don't want to risk anyone's health for the exam. And, we have not gotten any information yet from California about practice waivers or diploma waivers or privileges. That might be another possibility, but they haven't gone very far there. And then I think we add one other layer to this, just to make it even a little more complicated. The relationship between the bar examiners and the state court in California, as in many states, is fraught with tension and potential disagreements. And I thought that this was an interesting game of hot potato that the bar examiners played with the court, and the court handed back to the bar examiners and said, oh, no, this is your problem, not our problem. Did you get that feeling?
Yeah, that's true. I didn't think about it that way, but yeah, so the examiners created the task force, which gave recommendations, but only recommendations to the court. And then the court, rather than what we've seen in pretty much every state where the court has come up with a ruling, the court made a decision. And in California, it's kind of unique that the court sort of made a decision, but sort of didn't make a decision, kind of sent it back to, really put the onus on the NCBE and the state bar to figure it out, without really, I think, leaving much room for what happens if they don't figure it out. It sounds to me like if they don't figure this out, then there's just no exam for the rest of 2020. But that's almost like by default.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I also want to caveat all of this and all of our discussion about these exam dates to say that we think you should be studying now for lots of reasons. We've got a webinar that we've done, and we'll link to that, talking about why we think this is the best time to take the exam, particularly if you're a repeat bar taker. And we'll get to it in some of these other states that are offering choices. But I think that the reality is you should be studying. Don't sit back and wait for a decision to be made. We don't know when those are going to come, although we do know the National Conference is going to announce a decision on May 5th about their next steps. Should we talk about that right now before we get to these other states? Okay.
Perfect.
So the National Conference has to make a decision about whether or not they can give an exam in July or September 9th or September 30th or some other date. And you might say, well, why is that significant? Well, the problem here is that you have to have enough people taking the test. We'll go back to that dependability or reliability index. You have to have enough statistical points in your model to make it work. And that turns out you need a number of bar takers. So when we look at all of these states that have said they're going to do a July exam, the one big state that everyone's watching is, of course, Florida. It always comes down to Florida, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. It does.
And so we thought maybe Florida would make some decision after they released the results. They didn't. We thought maybe they'd make some decision after the governor announced the reopening in phase 1 last week, and they didn't. I think if Florida says they're going to give an exam in July, then the bar examiners probably have enough people taking the test nationally to go ahead and give that exam. But I think if Florida pulls out of that July date, when you look at the map, it's a lot of states, but a lot of states that have 100 bar takers, a couple hundred bar takers. It just doesn't look like enough to have a critical mass. Do you read the map that way as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard because if you just look at the number of states, then of course it seems like, oh, well, it's actually not that many states have already announced that they're not giving the exam in July. But when you look at the populations, the bar taker populations of those states, the ones who have said no are, I mean, obviously California and New York are just the biggest, these huge jurisdictions. And then Florida is kind of hanging out there like, all right, you're another, could tip it either way. So yeah, it's really interesting that they have refused thus far to say anything really at all.
I got to tell you, the Florida bar is always interesting. They've been offered the opportunity to give the test at all of the law schools in Florida, which would certainly beat sending everyone to Tampa and putting a big group of people together in one room. But we'll see what happens. And I think this May 5th date is going to tell us a lot. But I have a feeling that the National Conference and the Florida bar examiners are continuing to play a game of chicken. who's going to back out first or who's going to go forward. So that's one of the things we're going to be watching for early next week. I guess another state we ought to look at, of course, is New York, right?
Yes. Yeah, if you'd like to talk about, they made a new announcement about how they're going to be doing the prioritization. So
yeah. New York has already announced that they're moving the exam back to September 9th and 10th. And then earlier this week, they put out an announcement and they said, look, we want to seat as many candidates as possible. And the New York law schools, there are 15 law schools physically in New York, have offered their facilities to accommodate test takers. So again, I think that's how they're going to do it rather than putting everyone in the Javits Center or sending them up to Albany or Buffalo. But they indicated that they hope it will be possible, and that's not very encouraging, they hope it will be possible to administer the September exam. But then they go on to say that because of the current conditions in New York, and those I think are clear to all of us, the seating capacity for the September exam will have to be limited. There just isn't enough room for all of the New York takers. And that the examiners probably will not be able to seat all the applicants who would want to take the exam there. So here's what the New York examiners are doing. They are beginning a rolling application process that will begin on Tuesday, May 5th at midnight, so 12:01 a.m., and it will run through Friday, May 15th at midnight. And during that period of time, applications will be accepted from anyone who has a JD or an LLM candidate, and they're sitting for the bar exam for the very first time, and they've graduated or will graduate in spring 2020 from one of the 15 New York law schools. So it's a lot there. You have to have applied during that window of time. You have to be a JD or an LLM candidate. You have to be a first-time taker. So you can't have taken the bar in another jurisdiction. You can't have taken the New York exam and failed it somewhere else. You have to be graduating in spring of 2020. And you have to have attended one of the 15 New York law schools. They will attempt to fill the seats that they have with that group. Then, if they have seats left over after that group has applied, they will go to a priority method, and the priority is going to go to a larger pool of candidates. And here's where it gets a little more difficult. They haven't really told us how they're going to rank that group of candidates. We assume it may have something to do with when you get your application in, but we also know that if you're a non-ABA, if you're a foreign trained student, you're probably lower on the list. If you're not a New York resident, lower on the list. If you're a repeat taker, lower on the list. Unfortunately, we don't know what the list is beyond that first grouping, which makes me think, the more I've thought about it, that the examiners expect that the seats they have will get taken up entirely by this first group. I mean, does that seem right to you?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about all of the law students who are graduating in this spring in New York from New York law schools, that's a pretty significant number of people right there. And I think New York is, obviously, they've been hit so incredibly hard by this virus, and I just don't think they're anticipating being able to have very many people at all sitting for this exam. So yeah, I'm just, I mean, obviously it's speculation, but I'm not sure that we're going to get very deep into that second pool if you don't meet those requirements.
And so then the examiners make a recommendation. I want to follow up on this. They suggest that candidates, they say, are strongly encouraged that you sit for the UBE at a later date or in other jurisdictions that are better suited to accommodate test takers. So let's talk about those options. I think one of the misunderstandings about the uniform bar exam, which is the test that's given in New York, is that you have to physically take it in New York for your score to apply in New York, and that's not true. There are, I think, roughly 32 jurisdictions and territories that offer the UBE. You could go to any of those that would allow you to take their exam, and in doing so, if you get a score that's high enough, in New York's case it's 266 or better, you can then apply that score to New York and become a member of the New York Bar if you meet all the other qualifications. So it is not necessary to physically sit in New York to take the exam. Now, there are a couple of things that we want to caveat about that. One of the items, and it came up last night, I got a text from a student who said, I applied to the New York UBE because they didn't require a character and fitness check to be completed before I sat for the exam, and I haven't done one yet. And I see that some of these other UBE jurisdictions require character and fitness checks. Yeah, there are going to be different rules in each of these jurisdictions, and you're going to have to go to the bar examiner's websites of these other states and figure out a couple of things. One, are you eligible to take the exam? If you're a foreign trained attorney, there aren't a lot of states where you can do that outside of New York. There are a few, but you need to check on it to see what your credentials are and how they would work. Second thing is you got to really look at the administration application deadlines, right? Some of those deadlines are coming up. A few have already passed. Some of them are being extended because you and I talked about this earlier. How do you get fingerprints done right now? I don't know. How do you get things notarized? Very difficult to do. So some states are modifying their requirements. Some are extending their application dates, but it's all state by state. And then I think you have to look at what kind of rules they have around character and fitness. If you haven't done one, do you have to have one done beforehand? If you did one in New York, can that just be transferred over to the new jurisdiction? I don't know the answers. Those are all individualized questions. And I know you got some questions from students about contacting bar examiners, right?
Yeah, so specifically we had a question about someone who couldn't get through to the New York examiner's office, but I'm sure this is duplicated throughout the country right now, that people just aren't able to get a hold of the state examiner's offices to ask questions.
Yeah, and I think the important thing to understand here is that the only way you're going to get information is from their websites. You could email the bar examiners. You may or may not get responses. I know the people that are trying to phone call in, that's just not going to happen. I don't know any state bar examiners that are answering their phones. They're not in the office physically. So I think it's on you as an applicant to check out all of these rules and see where you want to go. Now, if you're not sure what states offer the UBE, you can go a couple of different places. You can go to celebrationbarreview.com, go to our UBE course page. We list all the jurisdictions there. You can also go to the National Conference's webpage, and we'll link to that. It's ncbex.org, and they have all of the states and the requirements. But again, you need to go to individual states and check their requirements. And I particularly want to emphasize this for foreign attorneys, because not every UBE jurisdiction will let you sit in their state. If you've got your law degree from an ABA accredited law school, you should be able to sit in any of the UBE jurisdictions, but you may have missed some deadlines. There may be some of these character and fitness rules and some of these other things that come out. And of course, the other alternative, as the bar examiner said in New York, is you simply sit out this exam and wait until February of 2021. Even if that's the case, I would be studying now. I would study as though you're taking an exam in July or September and not sit on the sidelines. It's the people that sit on the sidelines that are going to get hurt, I think, in this entire process. So I want to continue to encourage that even in the wake of this news. But remember that, and when we got this question too, somebody said, I graduated law school in 2015, but I never took the bar exam. Can I get this diploma waiver or be granted admission into, priority in New York? The answer is no, in both cases. The diploma waiver, the ability to have a temporary practice certificate, is going to be limited in almost every state to recent graduates who have never taken the bar exam before. If you took the exam in years past, nope, doesn't work. If you never took the exam and you graduated years ago, it still doesn't work. You have to be a 2020 grad, typically have to be living in that state, maybe had to go to the law school in that state, and then you've got to get hired by a local attorney in that state, and then it's good for, a short period of time, maybe 4 months to 16, 18 months, but then you'll still have to take a bar exam. So for those of you that were thinking this is the end of the bar exam, not so. There will still be bar exams out there. So I think that catches us up on New York. Does that sound right? Like we've covered the possibilities there?
Yeah, there's just one more question that people had with these states where they're saying that, which now there's two of them, I believe, where they're saying that they're going to do this prioritization. Students were wondering, if I'm not sure that I'm going to get a spot, I don't meet that initial requirement, so I would be in that second group of people, then what could I register? Should I register for, let's say, New York and North Dakota, and then withdraw from one if I get a spot in New York, withdraw from North Dakota. If I don't get into New York, great, I can take it there.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the answer is I would try that. I certainly would let the examiners know that that's your intention, so that there's no sense that you were trying to game the system or do something that they didn't want you to do. But I don't see any rules. Of course, we never had this situation before. I don't see any rules on most of these state exams where they're saying you can't have applied to another state. And certainly with this encouragement from the New York examiners now, I think you've got kind of covering or a safe harbor to say, well, look, the New York examiners have said I should go to another state. I'm going to apply in New York as well, but I don't expect to get accepted to sit for the exam there. So I think it makes sense to register for a couple of them, put together your plan B and start moving. It's going to require some work. I'm not going to lie to you. It's going to require some legwork to figure out which state you want to sit in. But again, it doesn't matter where you take the exam. The scores are good in any UBE jurisdiction. So don't lock yourself into feeling like you have to be in a particular state, particularly if that state doesn't give an exam or if it pushes it back. And DC is an example of a jurisdiction that's in the UBE. They've said they may not give an exam. We won't know until next week at the earliest. So does that mean no one will get into the DC bar? No. Anybody that's got the 266 score that they require and wants to apply to the DC bar could do so, even though they might potentially not give an exam. So it's a complicated world.
Yeah, it is. All right. So another state that made an announcement about what they're doing is Texas.
Yeah.
So Texas decided to do, as of now, they are planning to hold the July exam. And then they are additionally, so rather than instead of or as a backup plan, they will additionally give another exam on September 9th, 10th, and 11th, because I think you mentioned Texas this is the last examination where they're giving the Texas state-specific exam rather than the UBE, which they'll move to in 2021. So they still have the 2.5-day exam. So in Texas now you've got the choice, and I do believe they framed it as a choice.
Yes.
You may not apply for both to take both. You may either take the July exam or you can apply to take the September 9th, 10th, and 11th exam.
Yeah, and they're not the only state that's done that. I'm thinking Tennessee has also offered a choice of dates, although they haven't said it's an or, but I assume that's what they mean. So I think one of the questions that comes up is if you're in one of those states or you want to go to one of those states that's got the 2 exam date choices, what should you do? And you and I have talked about this offline a bit. I think we're both of the mind that you should try for the earlier test date. If you're going to Texas, I would take the earlier test date, and here's why. Most people, just by human nature, will delay to the later date. I think that makes sense. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot going on. Why not give yourself those extra, 30, 40 days? I get that. However, when you change the applicant pool, you change the scoring. And I think you will have a much smaller applicant pool in that July 28th, 29th, 30th test in Texas than you'd have in September. And therefore, and I don't think you'll have anywhere near the number of first-time takers, because I think inevitably, think back to your 3L days. I'm too old to remember mine, but I know there's no way I would have wanted to take the earlier exam. I would have definitely opted for the later test. And so I think that we're going to see a lot of those first-time takers who would typically be the people that would be most likely to pass the exam, they will defer into the later test date. So I would go into the earlier test date, take that. I think you're going to get better scoring. I think you're going to have a much less competitive environment. Now, the way that I read these multiple test dates is that I think results will come out from the July exam prior to certainly the later test date in September. I'm not sure if they'll get them out before the early September test date, which is very weird. So you might have people who have decided to take an early test in Texas, which is for this year, and then maybe they go off to take the UBE somewhere in September, or they do 2 or maybe 3 UBE dates in September. This is all wild. This is totally unprecedented. Yeah. It's all cases of first impression, and no one really knows what's permissible or not permissible. I suspect each state will make their own determination. Their own bar examiners will just set a policy and say, we will accept or won't accept this. Tell us, you're telling us you're taking 2 other exams before you take this one. I don't know. And of course, we have no idea how long it'll take to get these grades back. So, the normal cycle of take the exam, get the grades, then sit for the next exam is completely thrown up in the air, isn't it? We might have Texas results back before some of these other exams in September are given. That would be weird, wouldn't it?
Yeah, very strange. I think it's just a good note that your policy of do not hide anything from the examiners. Everything is very up in the air and it's very hard to get a hold of them and it's very hard to ask these questions. So
Yes.
I would say that the onus is on you as the test taker to make sure that you are giving them all the information, that you're being forthright and showing that you are not trying to hide anything or game the system, that you are, you're kind of saying, hey, I'm this is my plan, but if this is against the rules, I am not seeing anything that says it's against the rules, but if it is, I will withdraw whatever I need to make sure that I'm following the rules. I just wouldn't, it's really uncertain. I think it's going to be a mess to sort out after the fact, probably, because you're probably going to have a lot of people claiming that's not fair, this person did this, or or I thought I couldn't do this and then I found out I could have. And so I think on the whole, just honesty is always the best policy. Don't hide anything, be straightforward with what you're doing, so that if the state or the jurisdiction has a problem with what you're doing, they can tell you that before you sit for the exam, and hopefully you can rectify the issue, because the worst thing would be for you to pass and then find out that the state was unhappy with you for, taking it twice or taking it in two separate jurisdictions in the fall or whatever it might be. So
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case. And we can't advise you directly, but I think that advice generally would apply. I mean, just be straightforward and be upfront. Tell them what you're doing. Nobody knows what's going on. The examiners certainly don't know any more than we do. I think just giving them the courtesy of letting them know your plans so that they can tell you, hey, that's okay or it's not, is a good idea. So we had some other states that also changed their test dates. We want to just briefly highlight those.
Yeah, so Georgia announced that they will be giving the exam on September 9th and 10th. And they are also doing a practice waiver for recent law graduates. Again, that's that very highly specific small group of people who are graduating right now. If that's you, you're taking finals right now. And those people will be able to do the practice waiver, and then they will have to take and pass the Georgia bar once or before the waiver time is up.
Yeah, and that's not a panacea. I mean, this practice waiver is not, it's not, first of all, it's very few people are going to be able to do it. But secondly, you're going to end up having to take a bar exam after you've been out of law school for a while and while you're working. And ask anyone that's had to do it, that is not easy. So, we'll see. I know that a lot of people, again, will take advantage of that if they can, but you need an attorney in that state to hire you. And the few states that have started to talk about this rule have said, yeah, but those law firms can't bill your hours and they got to pay you.
Well, as of now, the only one who's said that is Arizona, I believe.
Oh, Arizona's the only one.
Yes,
okay.
That's the only one that said that they can't bill out your time.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So some of the others, I guess you can bill out the time. So you will be a very overtrained and underpaid paralegal, I think. All right. What other states have pushed away from the July exam?
All right. Illinois, unsurprisingly, has also pushed away. They are now saying September 9th and 10th. So that's definitely the popular date, which I think reflects that the examiners do recognize that they want to get recent law grads the opportunity to take the exam as quickly as possible. And then Washington State, this is a surprising one. Washington State, which has been hit very hard, is planning on the July exam still. I know, and they have an existing rule that allows a practice waiver for up to 18 months for recent grads. So they are pointing to that, but yet still saying they're going to charge ahead with the July exam. So obviously that's one of those that we'll find out what the national conference says next week or in a few days and know whether or not that's realistic or going to happen. But as of now, that's Washington State's stance.
Yeah. And I just want to remind people again that on our website, we do have a link to all of these states and the court orders. You should check it frequently because, as we've learned, this changes multiple times every day. So there you go. So that's part of it.
And then the last two real quick are just Arkansas has said that they will do, which is UBE, they've said they will do a September date if there's no July exam. They have not picked the September date yet. They're waiting to see if they will be holding the July exam or not. And New Mexico has said they will not hold the July exam. They will postpone it to September, but they also have not picked a date yet. So
yeah, so it's interesting. Right. So we got some states that said September 9th. Some said September 30th, like Massachusetts. Some said, we don't know, like DC. Some said it'll be sometime in September, maybe. I don't know. And the national conference, I thought, was really very generous in saying they would write 3 tests, right? The July test, the September 9th, and the September 30th test. I bet somewhere there are bar examiners contacting the NCBE saying, how about a test in December, or some other date. So hold on to everything next week. I think that the announcement from the national conference will be fascinating to watch and see what happens. So there's a lot that's going on there. Did we have any other questions that came in that we wanted to address on all of this?
I think the last one that we have, which is a really great question, is, are you aware of whether this one's specific to California, but any state bars are extending the application deadlines for the September administration of the bar exam? So basically, now that the exam is going to be given later, do I have any leeway with the application deadline?
Yeah, the answer is we don't know of any specifically, but it'll be up to each applicant to follow those deadlines in the state that they're interested in. And the only way you're going to know that, I think, is by going to the examiner's website. Don't go to the national conference. Go to the state bar exam website. Look at the rules. Look at the updates. Most of the state bars have been very good about updating their information as they're able to, but in many cases they have to get approval from their state court to make these kinds of changes. Some of them are administrative, some are not. And so I suspect it goes back to this tension between bar examiners and state courts. There's some of these states are working better together than others. And so there may be some changes. Well, I think there will be changes in the upcoming days and weeks. I suspect some states will modify their admission deadlines. States like California and Georgia that haven't even released their results yet, I think almost certainly have to do that. So just watch it, but you're going to be responsible for whatever those dates are and whatever changes they make. So don't get caught and don't be surprised by assuming that everything would be moved back. You should never make that assumption here.
Right, definitely. And then the one last thing is, do you have any sort of tips for, now that students are knowing in a lot of these jurisdictions, I'm going to be studying for months longer than I thought I was. How do I not burn out? How do I not just get completely exhausted?
Yeah, that's a great question. For our students, we're recommending, if you're taking the exam in July, to be studying about 15 to 20 hours a week right now. If you're taking the September 9th date, we think that drops down to about 10 to 15 hours. And the same would be true really for the September 30th exam. If you are pushing back to February of 2021, 5 to 10 hours a week is enough. And I think that that's the key, is doing a little bit every week and not trying to go crazy. But I will say the people that are going to get in trouble are the ones who are assuming that they're saying, say you're in Florida, and you say, there's no way they're going to give this exam in July. I mean, I know they're not going to give the exam in July, so I'm not going to study right now. And then, in typical Florida fashion, they say, yep, we're going to give the exam. And you go, whoa, I just lost that time that I should have had. And now you're in panic mode trying to study. I'm more concerned about those folks than I am about the people that feel like they might burn out. I think that if you are in something other than a traditional bar review course, a step-by-step process of learning, you can draw that out over a much longer period of time without burning out. I think that the folks that are really going to struggle here are the traditional big box bar review students who are used to or expect a 7 or 8 week program, and that probably isn't going to happen the way they thought it would. And then there's the uncertainty of the exam date, and they're caught unaware or caught short. That's bad news for them. Frankly, it's good news for everybody else, because if those people aren't in the exam, I just think it creates an open lane for a lot more people to pass the test that do arrive and that are prepared. So you want to be one of those people that's prepared. I think that's really the key. And I wouldn't try to do too much. I think in this coronavirus world, I know, Megan, you're juggling 10 different things, children,
Yeah.
work, community, lots of hats. It's easy to feel stressed and burned out. And so one of the keys here is to schedule your time and dedicate some time for study, whether it's early in the morning or after the kids go to bed at night, or, maybe you just have a separate room in the house or the apartment where you're able to do some studying, and you put up the sign that says, leave me alone for a while, or the big cross, the X for the kids that can't read. But that you do some work every day that you can. and then be kind to yourself. Don't beat yourself up. Everyone is struggling in this situation. Everyone is working hard to cope generally, and you add the bar exam on top of it, it makes it even tougher. So I think it's just important to be practicing some self-care during this process. What do you think?
Wonderful. Yeah, I mean, we always say it's a marathon, but it is really a marathon now. If you try to sprint it, you will be exhausted way before we get to September. So if you've got that longer time to study, that doesn't mean, oh, good, I can make it, I can double the amount of time that I was planning on studying. It just means like, let's be slow and steady. Do some every day. Keep at it every single day. Keep the momentum going. Inertia is your friend. You want to get in that, build those good habits, take care of yourself, and just continue pushing on, but don't burn out. Don't push yourself beyond what's reasonable. And you are the best arbiter of that for yourself and knowing what your limits are, but don't let it being further away stop you from doing anything or make you sort of lull you into a false sense of security or complacency. Keep pushing forward, because September will come a lot quicker than you think it's going to. So yeah, definitely keep moving forward.
Yeah. See you in September. All right. Well, listen, Megan, thank you so much for joining me today, as always.
Yes, my
Appreciate
pleasure.
your wisdom and insights and research. And undoubtedly, next week, I can't even imagine what that's going to be like. A lot coming up. California results, NCBE making their announcement. We'll see what happens in a bunch of other states. And we will see some of you in September and some of you in July, I suppose. But we'll see what happens. But again, thanks so much for being with us today.
Yes, of course. Bye.
That's our episode for this week. I hope it's been encouraging, helpful, and informative. We really appreciate all of you being with us and being loyal listeners and subscribers to the podcast. I do want to remind you before we leave you that we have our special free training coming up. Now is the best time to take the bar exam. Why you should ignore the crowd and the fear. We're offering it Saturday at 5 p.m. Eastern. That would be 2 o'clock Pacific time. And Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 o'clock Pacific time. It's free to register. There's a live Q&A, in which we're going to take your questions about anything that's going on in the bar exam, and with all the changes coming up around these different dates and administrations of the exam. Lots of strategies to discuss and things to consider as you plan on what to do. You can register just by going to the show notes or by going to celebrationbarreview.com/now. All right. Well, we expect a really busy week next week as well. We'll be back to you with that information as soon as we get it. We know we've got California results coming, maybe Georgia results, and of course we'll get the announcement from the national conference about what they're going to do around the July and September bar exams. So stick around, stay with us, and we'll see you next week along the extra mile. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at www.celebrationbarreview.com.